So, there's this phrase that gets thrown around Washington all the time.
Mm.
And it sounds, I don't know, incredibly dry. Almost like something you'd hear in a fluorescent-lit meeting with a forensic accountant, right? It's called the power of the purse.
It really does have a bureaucratic ring to it.
Right.
It sounds like we're about to spend the next, 20 minutes balancing a checkbook or something.
Right. But here's the hook, and this is why we're doing this deep dive. That boring little phrase is actually like the nuclear launch code of American politics. It is the single most explosive weapon in the Constitution.
Oh, without a doubt. I mean, if you strip away all the pomp and circumstance, the power of the purse is the ultimate leash. The president can command the most powerful military in history, give grand speeches,
Sure.
but they cannot buy a single paperclip unless Congress writes the check.
And that's the big question we're really wrestling with today. We're looking at a stack of sources here, some structural breakdowns of the budget process, and a really chaotic case study from 2018, and we're trying to answer one thing. Is Congress just a talking shop?
That's the cynicism, right? Is it just a place for people to make speeches for cable news while the real work happens somewhere else?
Exactly. Or do they actually hold the real power because they control the money? So today, we're going to explore how this is supposed to work, how it breaks down into government shutdowns, and then
we get to the fun part.
yes, the gritty reality of pork barrel politics.
And we have the perfect case study. It's got a midnight deadline, a lone senator holding the entire government hostage, a shutdown that lasted all of 5 hours.
And a bridge to an island with 50 people on it.
A bridge to nowhere.
I cannot wait to get to that part. But let's start with the machinery first. We need to understand the rules of the game before we can really appreciate how they get broken.
Yeah.
Where does this power of the purse even come from?
Well, it's not just a norm or a tradition. It's hard-coded into the operating system of the United States. Article 1 of the Constitution. The founders were, absolutely terrified of a monarch and executive who had unlimited money. So they designed a system where the executive branch has to go to the people's branch, to Congress, and basically ask for an allowance.
It's a check and a balance.
It is the fundamental check. The idea is simple. The sword is in the hands of the president, but the purse is in the hands of Congress. You separate them so no one person can bankrupt the country or just decide to wage a war on a whim.
Okay, so looking at this flowchart in our notes, there's an ideal process. This is the version you learned in civics class. Can you just walk us through that happy path?
In a perfect world, it's very logical. It starts with all the federal agencies. The Pentagon, Department of Education, Agriculture, they figure out what they need for the next year.
And make their shopping lists.
Exactly. They submit those requests to the president.
And the president bundles it all together.
Right. The president's office reviews it, puts their own policy spin on it, and then submits a formal budget request to Congress. This is usually early in the year.
And I think this is where a lot of people get confused. They hear the president's budget on the news and think that's the final word.
It's definitely not the law. It's a wish list. I mean, think of it as an opening bid in a really high-stakes negotiation. Once that document hits Capitol Hill, Congress can, and often does, just tear it up and start over.
So they can just say no.
They can say, you want $1 billion for this. How about 0? Or how about $2 billion? The ball is entirely in their court.
So what happens next?
Both the House and the Senate have appropriations committees. These are the people who actually write the spending bills. They hold hearings, they debate the specific line items, they mark them up.
And since the House and the Senate, well, they rarely agree on anything.
They almost never agree initially, so they have to meet in what's called a conference committee to iron out the differences.
Like a reconciliation room?
Once they have one unified bill, both chambers vote again, it goes to the president signs it, and boom, the government is funded.
That sounds incredibly orderly.
Yeah.
A well-oiled machine.
It does. It looks fantastic on paper.
But it's not reality.
Yeah.
I'm looking at a stat here that's just, it's brutal. It says that only about 5% of all bills that are introduced actually become law.
It is a staggering failure rate, and it really highlights that the system wasn't designed for efficiency, it was designed for deliberation. But in the modern era, deliberation has pretty much just morphed into gridlock.
So what happens when that nice flowchart breaks? The clock runs out, they haven't passed the bill.
Well, we get to the nuclear option, the government shutdown.
We hear about shutdowns so often, now they almost feel routine, but what's actually technically happening?
It's exactly what it sounds like. If Congress doesn't appropriate the money by the midnight deadline, the legal authority for federal agencies to spend money just evaporates. Poof.
So it's not a pause, it's an unplug.
It is an unplug. Non-essential employees are furloughed. National parks close, the Smithsonian locks its doors, the entire machinery of state just grinds to a halt.
It's a huge disruption, but it's also the ultimate leverage. It's Congress saying to the president, we can unplug you.
Precisely. But here's the twist. While Congress holds the plug, they're terrified of pulling it because the public usually blames them for the chaos.
A game of chicken.
A game of chicken where both drivers are blindfolded.
Which brings us right to our case study. February 9th, 2018. This is such a fascinating moment because it shows that pressure cooker exploding.
Context is so key here. In early 2018, the Republicans controlled everything. The House, the Senate, and the White House with President Trump.
So in theory, this should be easy. Single-party rule, no reason for gridlock.
You would think. But this was the second government shutdown they were facing that year. They'd already had a brief one just 3 weeks before.
So tensions are already high, funding expires at midnight, everyone expects a last-minute deal to pass. But then one man stands up in the Senate and says, not so fast.
Senator Rand Paul from Kentucky.
And this is what's so interesting. It wasn't a partisan fight, Democrats versus Republicans. This was a Republican senator holding up a bill supported by his own party's leadership. What was his problem?
Rand Paul is he's a budget hawk. He's a fiscal conservative. And he looked at the spending bill his party had put together, and he was just horrified. He didn't just object, he filibustered. He used the Senate's rules to delay the vote.
He gave a speech that our notes called doom-laden.
Oh, he did. He basically accused his own party of betraying its core principles. He pointed out the hypocrisy. He said something like, I ran for office because I was very critical of President Obama's trillion-dollar deficits.
I have the quote right here. He says, now we have Republicans hand in hand with Democrats offering us trillion-dollar deficits.
It was a stinging critique. He was basically asking, if we criticize the other guys for spending this much, how can we possibly spend even more now that we're in charge?
Structurally, it's a completely valid point. He was saying, you guys are breaking the one tool we have to control spending.
Exactly. But his colleagues, they were not in a philosophical mood. They were in a let's just get this done and go home mood. He was the only thing in their way.
The reaction was pretty blunt. Democrat Senator Claire McCaskill said he looked clueless.
And his fellow Republican, Senator John Thune, called the whole thing a colossal waste of time because they knew he couldn't stop the bill forever. He only had the power to delay it.
And delay it he did. Midnight struck. The deadline passed.
And technically, for a few hours, the United States government shut down.
But this was a weird one. It wasn't like those shutdowns where the national parks are closed for weeks.
Very weird. It happened in the middle of the night, lasted for maybe 5 hours. Most Americans probably slept through the entire collapse of the federal government.
And by the time people were having their coffee, the House had passed it, the Senate had passed it, Trump had signed it, the government was back on.
So on the surface, it just looks like a blip, a bit of political theater.
But, and this is the key to our deep dive, we need to look at what was in that bill. Rand Paul was holding it up over the cost. So what was the price tag to get the government open again?
It was massive. And this gets to the heart of why the process is so broken. To get the votes from both sides, the leadership just decided to stop fighting over cuts and just spend more on, well, everything.
The have your cake and eat it too strategy.
The bill proposed a spending increase of about $300 billion. Some sources estimated that with interest and everything, it could add up to $500 billion to the deficit.
$500 billion. So much for fiscal conservatism.
This is what our notes call the cost of compromise. To get Republicans on board, the bill had $165 billion in extra defense spending. House Speaker Paul Ryan called it a great victory for our men and women in uniform.
Okay, so that's the guns part of the equation. That gets the Republican votes. What about the butter? What did the Democrats get?
They got $131 billion in domestic spending for infrastructure, healthcare, a lot for tackling the opioid crisis.
So the way they solved gridlock was to say, you get what you want, I get what I want, and we'll just put it all on the national credit card.
Precisely. Which, completely validates Rand Paul's core argument. He was warning that the only way Congress uses the power of the purse now is just to open it wider for everyone.
But even with all that money, not everyone was happy. We have to talk about Nancy Pelosi, who was the House Minority Leader.
Right. While Rand Paul was fighting the fiscal battle in the Senate, she was fighting a completely different battle in the House.
She staged a record-breaking protest, 8 hours on the House floor.
It was a spectacle. She used a privilege called the Magic Minute to speak for 8 straight hours, wearing foreign shields the whole time, reading stories of immigrants.
Specifically dreamers, young people brought to the U.S. illegally as kids. Why? The bill had tons of domestic spending. What was missing for her?
Legal protections. Trump had recently canceled the Obama-era protections for Dreamers. They were facing deportation. And Pelosi wanted legal status for them written into this budget deal.
But it wasn't there.
It was not.
So she holds the floor for 8 hours, dominates the news, and then what?
Well, this is the nuance of political leadership. She made her point very publicly. She energized her base. She showed she was fighting. But when it came to the actual vote, she did not order her party to vote no.
That's a fascinating calculation. Publicly oppose it, give the speech of her life, but then privately let it pass.
She knew that a long shutdown over immigration might backfire, especially when all that money for healthcare and infrastructure was on the table. So she took the moral high ground, but let the money flow.
It just shows that the power of the purse is often less about the actual money and more about leverage and signaling.
It's absolutely a signaling mechanism. It's about showing your voters what you're fighting for, even if you know you're going to lose the vote itself.
Okay, let's pivot a bit. We've talked about the high-level budget, the trillions and billions, but this power of the purse also works on a much smaller, grittier level, a level that has a very famous name.
Pork barrel politics.
Pork. Such a flavorful term. For anyone listening who might be thinking of a barbecue, what is pork in a congressional sense?
It refers to when federal money is directed to a very specific project in a specific congressional district, not because it's a national necessity, but to win political support for that local representative.
So it's a member of Congress bringing home the bacon to please their voters.
That's the cynical but often accurate view. A defender would say, hey, I know what my district needs better than some bureaucrat in Washington. If I don't fight for my district, who will?
But there's a line between a local need and just pure waste. And our sources have the absolute poster child for crossing that line, the bridge to nowhere.
The Gravina Island Highway. This thing is legendary. If you study government waste in a political science class, this is chapter 1.
Okay, break it down for us. What was this project?
So Congress allocated somewhere around $400 million to build a bridge in Alaska. This bridge was meant to connect a small town called Ketchikan to a place called Gravina Island.
And what was on Gravina Island? A huge military base, a major port.
An airport, and a population of about 50 people.
50, as in 50.
50. 50.
I'm just doing the math here. That's $8 million per resident. You could have bought every single person on that island a mansion and a helicopter and still had money left over.
It's absurd. But the Alaskan members of Congress fought tooth and nail for it. Why? Because construction contracts mean jobs. $400 million pouring into your local economy is a huge boom. It makes you look amazing to your constituents.
But to the taxpayer in Florida or Ohio, it just looks like highway robbery.
And that's the double-edged sword of the power of the purse. It incentivizes waste because every single member is fighting for their own little slice of the pie instead of caring about the size of the whole pie.
And this ties back to why these big bills are so hard to pass. If you want my vote for your aircraft carrier, you better vote for my bridge.
That's exactly it. It's called log rolling, and it's why these bills get so bloated. You just staple all these little pork projects together until you have enough votes to pass the main thing.
So let's zoom out. We've seen the machinery, the shutdown chaos, the pork. Let's go back to our big question. Is Congress just a talking shop? Or do they really hold the power?
It's a complex evaluation. I mean, based on what we've just discussed, there are really strong arguments on both sides.
Okay, play devil's advocate. What's the argument that Congress does hold the real power?
Well, structurally, they hold the checkbook. All money bills have to start in the House. They decide where the money goes. And as we saw with the shutdown, the government literally stops without them. The president can't do anything if there's no money.
True. When push comes to shove, Congress can stop the machine.
Yeah.
But then you look at that 2018 case. The president sets the agenda. The public pressure builds. And it feels like Congress almost always caves in the end.
That's the counterargument. There's a strong case to be made that the power of the purse has become, pretty dysfunctional.
How so?
Well, look at the process. That nice, neat flowchart is basically dead. Congress can't pass regular budgets anymore. They rely on these massive, last-minute omnibus bills just to keep the lights on.
Like the one in 2018. A 600-page bill dropped in the middle of the night.
Exactly. When you're passing a bill that big at 2 in the morning, are you really exercising careful oversight? Are you checking the president's power? Or are you just panicking?
It feels like they've abdicated the responsibility to manage the details, and now they just manage the crisis.
And the president often wins the PR war. When the government shuts down, the public blames Congress for being dysfunctional. That pressure forces them to sign the check. So while Congress has the constitutional power, the political reality often shifts the leverage back to the White House.
So what does all this mean for you, the listener? We started by saying the power of the curse is a weapon, but after this, it feels like a weapon that backfires as often as it hits the target.
It's a mechanism that forces consensus. But in our polarized world, consensus has become incredibly expensive.
That brings us to the end of this deep dive. We've gone from the neat lines of the Constitution to a midnight panic in the Senate to a $400 million bridge for 50 people.
We have. And the takeaway is that while Congress is definitely not just a talking shop, they're moving massive amounts of money, the process is just so far from that clean, logical system you see in textbooks. It's messy, it's expensive, and it's driven by pure leverage.
And I want to leave you with one final thought to mull over. We talked about Rand Paul's objection. For a lot of people in that story, he was the villain because he caused a shutdown. But think about his core point.
The hypocrisy point.
Right. If the only way the power of the purse actually works, the only way to keep the government open without a crisis is for both sides to agree to spend more on everything, just ballooning the deficit, then is it really a check on power?
Or is it just a mechanism for mutual extravagance?
That is the trillion-dollar question. Thanks for diving in with us.
See you next time.